Namaste, everyone, and welcome to our first class on Kena Upanishad. Today we begin the study of the Kena Upanishad, and my talk this morning will be an introduction to the Kena Upanishad. I will be teaching the Kena Upanishad in a traditional manner. So let me explain briefly what I mean by teaching and studying a text in a traditional manner. In the Hindu tradition, we speak of a Sampradaya. It's a Sanskrit word, Sampradaya. It comes from the verb samprada, which means to gift, to hand down, to transmit. So a Sampradaya means a flow of knowledge, a gift of knowledge, a handing down of knowledge from a teacher to student. So Sampradaya is a lineage or a succession of teachers and students who are givers and receivers, transmitters and receivers of this knowledge. So to teach in a traditional manner, to teach with fidelity, to teach with faithfulness to a sampradaya is to teach what has been received, to convey both the content of what has been received, but also to use or to employ certain traditional ways of teaching. So there are certain traditional methods that have been handed down for the study of an Upanishad, and I will be using these traditional methods to teach this text with you. To teach in a traditional manner also means that I am not sharing with you, I am not transmitting to you a knowledge that is conceived personally by me. In the Upanishads, the teacher in the Sampradaya is described as a Srotriya. Srotriya is a very beautiful Sanskrit word like Sampradaya. Srotriya means one who teaches in accordance with the Sruti. Srotriya and Sruti have the same root in Sanskrit, to hear. So a Srotriya is one who teaches in consistency with the Sruti, with the Veda. Teaching in accordance with, a teacher who teaches in accordance with the Sruti is called a Srotriya, not one who gives his or her personal opinion or gives a knowledge that is created by him or by her. So that's important for understanding how we will be studying this text. Secondly, to study a text like the Upanishad in a traditional manner means to study the text as offering a life-changing, a life-transforming knowledge. It is a teaching that makes a difference. So at the end of this study together, if this teaching is fruitful, then you will recognize that this is a teaching that has changed something in the way in which I understand myself, I understand the world, changed the way in which I would relate to the world and to other living beings. So it's a knowledge that is fruitful. It's a knowledge that solves a problem or problems. So one can read the Kena Upanishad, and at the end of it, you'll say, I have read the Kena Upanishad. I know what this text says. I know the words of this text. But if the study does not transform us, then we have read the text without understanding. We know the words of the text, but we don't know, we have not understood the text. So study in the Hindu tradition, knowledge in the Hindu tradition was always transformative. It is knowledge that made a difference. And this is why it was so highly valued. It is knowledge that had the potential, the capacity to change our self-understanding and therefore to change the way we are in the world. It aims for deep understanding. It aims for deep transformation. I welcome, there are many great teachers in the history of the Hindu tradition. But this is a tradition that is not based on claims about the life of a particular historical person. In other words, we do not say in the Hindu tradition that a teaching is true because it came from person X or person Y. That's an important point to understand. We do not say a teaching is true because this person gave the teaching or that person gave the teaching. This tradition does not have an identifiable historical founder. We have many great teachers who belong to what I call the Sampradayas, but there is no historical founder of the Hindu tradition. One authoritative figure upon whose life and teachings this tradition stands or falls. So let me give you an example. If I came this morning and I told you that yesterday I went to feed the squirrels in my backyard, and one of the squirrels came forward and spoke to me and said, "You're giving me corn every time, but I would like to have some peanuts this time. Why don't you change the menu and give me some peanuts instead of corn?" And I came this morning and I told you I wanted to share this experience that I had with you. Now, if you trust me as a truth-telling person, you would say, you may believe me because, I know him to be a reliable, trustworthy person. So if he tells me that the squirrel in the backyard asked for peanuts rather than corn, I will believe him. Perhaps you may grant me, you may concede to me. But there's always a possibility that later you will discover that, I was not as truthful as you thought I was. Right? Or maybe you discover that perhaps, he's beginning to suffer from some kind of dementia, and he's, victim of illusions. Then, what I have said will crumble, right? Because you based it on your trust in me as a person, and therefore, you discover some fact about me that now changes your understanding of me, and therefore what I say to you begins to lose its validity. So I want to introduce to you two important words, paurusheya and apaurusheya. Paurusheya comes from purusha. Purusha means a person. So if a teaching is paurusheya, means it is based on the authority of a particular person. You You are faithful or you believe the teaching because of the person from whom the teaching has come. This is called a Paurusheya Jnana. Apaurusheya, now you put the negative before it, you get apaurusheya. So if we say that the teaching is apaurusheya, it means it does not depend, the truth of this teaching does not depend on a person. It is independent of the person. Its validity is independent of the person who gives the teaching. In a sense, apaurusheya jnana, a paurusheya teaching, non-personal teaching, is closer to what we regard as science. So a scientific claim, a scientific truth, does not depend on the person who makes the claim. It stands independent of the person. So we'll say that, science in many ways, generally speaking, is apaurusheya jnanam. It stands independent of the person making the claim, whereas paurusheya teaching depends on the authority of the person. So I want to say, and this is what we will, we'll be studying, that the teaching of the Upanishad is apaurusheya. Its validity does not depend on the facts of the life of a particular person. And we will see what this means as far as the Upanishad is concerned. So if the tradition is not dependent on the facts of the life of historical persons, on what is it based? On what does it stand? I've already hinted at that. It is based on a body of knowledge, a collection of teachings that we believe to be available in the texts. At least today we speak of them as texts. The text known as the Vedas. And that's interesting because the word Veda itself means knowledge. The very name itself, Veda, is knowledge, which gives us the indication it's a knowledge-based tradition. It's not a person-based tradition, it's a knowledge-based tradition. So Veda means knowledge, as you know, it comes from the Sanskrit root vid, to know, which is the same root for words like vision and so on in English, or video. All of these come from the Sanskrit root vid, which has to do with knowledge. And these teachings, as you know, are arranged in 4 collections: Rig, Sama, Yajur, and the Atharva Veda. Each verse is referred to as a mantra. Again, all of these words are important. Mantra comes from man, to think. In other words, it's a teaching meant for a thinking being, for a rational being. A mantra is a wisdom or a teaching meant for a person, a thoughtful, thinking person, from the root man, to think. So however we look at it, we always come back to this fact of knowledge. Vedas are called Shastram. We talk about the Veda Shastra, Shastram. Shastram again come from Shasanam, which means education or teaching. So a Shastra is that which educates, that which gives a teaching. So if the Hindu tradition, as I am saying, is not dependent on the life of a historical founder, life of a historical teaching, what is the origin of the Vedas? Why is this teaching considered to be authoritative? Why are we studying the Kena Upanishad? What is the basis? What is the value, the importance of studying this text? So clearly, the teachings in the Upanishads, Kena and other Upanishads, are understood. This is how the tradition has understood it. Are understood to originate with Ishvara. Ishvara is God, with the divine, Ishvara, as the first teacher. And the Upanishads themselves tell us this. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad speaks of this teaching, the Veda, this knowledge, as the breath of God, as given by the divine. The divine, God is the first teacher. In Bhagavad-Gita, Sri Krishna says that, Imam vivasvate proktam, I first taught this. I'm the first teacher. So the receivers or the recipients of this teaching are spoken of in our tradition as the rishis. The rishis are the receivers. So I spoke of Sampradaya. So we always, in all of the texts, all of the traditions, all of the Hindu traditions, acknowledge that every Sampradaya begins with Ishvara, with the divine as the first teacher. God is the first guru, the first teacher. The initiator of the Sampradaya is Ishvara. The receiver of the Sampradaya, the receiver of the teacher, is the Rishi. And so there are many Rishis who are mentioned in the Vedas. But the definition of a Rishi in the Hindu tradition, Rishi comes from the word, from a Sanskrit root meaning to see, from drish, to see. And the Rishi is defined as a mantra drashta, the one who sees the mantra, but in a sense, it's much more the hearer of the mantra. They are not mantra kartas, but mantra drashtas, those who see or hear these mantras, because they are given in the form of sound. They are hearers of the mantras that have a divine source. And these mantras are transmitted from teacher to student, from guru to shishya. And as I said, the process of transmitting knowledge, handing over knowledge from teacher to student is spoken of as the Sampradaya. This is the lineage. This is the flow. Now, here is something very interesting about the Hindu tradition. So even though there is a clear acknowledgement in the Vedas themselves, in other texts like Bhagavad-Gita that I mentioned, that this teaching has its origin in the first teacher, Ishvara, as the first guru. The great teachers of the Hindu tradition have not argued, have not made the argument that the teaching is authoritative merely because it comes from Ishvara. We acknowledge that the first guru, but even in relation to Ishvara, God, that is not the argument. The argument is not made that this teaching is true because it comes from the divine. It's an important part of the understanding, but it is not the principal argument given for the authority of the Veda. So if someone asks, why is the Veda authoritative? The traditional answer is not that it has come from God. The traditional answer, and this is again, I'm introducing something important here. I want you to keep the flow of my teaching. They would answer, as they have answered, that this knowledge, Veda, this knowledge, I'm using Veda here as knowledge, this knowledge is valid, this knowledge is true because it satisfies, it fulfills the criteria for valid knowledge. In other words, the Sanskrit term that is used here is Pramana. Pramana. The word in Sanskrit, Prama, means valid knowledge. Pramana is a source of valid knowledge. So the Vedas are regarded as a Pramana, a source of valid knowledge. A Pramana is a source of Prama, valid knowledge. So the Upanishad, Vedas as a whole, Upanishads, part of the Vedas, are regarded as true because they satisfy the criteria of valid knowledge. They are classified as a Pramana. Not merely because of the person who gave it. In a sense, the truth of knowledge is independent of the person who gives it. The validity of knowledge stands independently of the one who has given this knowledge. So then the next question is, what if we say that this teaching is true because it satisfies the criteria of valid knowledge? It is not true because it came from X, Y, or Z, but because it satisfies the criteria of valid knowledge. Then, of course, the question is, then what is that traditional criteria? What is the criteria that was employed by teachers, Hindu teachers, to validate knowledge? What is the criteria of truth? And some of these are very obvious, will be very obvious to you, but very interesting and very insightful. Because it applies to, in a sense, the knowledge generally. The criteria that was developed within the Hindu tradition applies to knowledge generally. So the first criteria of valid knowledge is that it must not be contradicted. Uncontradictedness must not be contradicted. In everyday matters, this is an important principle that we all apply. We hold things to be true, but if they are contradicted by what we know, then we regard that as invalid knowledge. So Shankara, in one of his commenting on one of the verses of the Bhagavad-Gita, says that if 100 Veda verses tell us that fire is cold, we cannot accept it as it is stated. Why? Because it is contradicted by everything that we know about fire. No one has ever experienced fire as being cold. Fire doesn't become cold because merely the Veda tells us that it is cold. It is contradicted by another valid source of knowledge. It is contradicted by another valid source of knowledge. So what is at heart here is a general principle, which is that truth does not contradict truth. Truth does not contradict truth. This is a big issue for every religious tradition. For example, if you have a sacred text that tells you the world is 6,000 years old, creation started 6,000 years old, and you have archaeological evidence that there is material, there are rocks that are billions of years old, then there is a contradiction between what your sacred text tells you and what you know from another valid pramana, another valid source of knowledge, which is, perception, the study of geology, and so on and so forth. At one time, we all, not us, but people around the world believed that the earth was the center of the universe and everything revolved around the earth. And then we discovered, no, that's not right. It was contradicted by the knowledge that the sun is the center of the earth. And then so that became invalid. It was invalidated by another source of knowledge. So uncontradicted means that the teachings of the Veda must not be contradicted by what is known from another valid source. That's important. Another valid source. So if I came to you and I said, I had this dream. There is a man who holds up the entire universe on the tip of one finger. All right? This is my dream. And therefore, this is true. Now, that's an absurd argument. My dream is not a valid source of knowledge. So the problem arises when one valid source of knowledge contradicts another valid source of knowledge. Then there is a problem. So the Veda must meet that test. The teachings of the Veda must meet that test to be considered to be valid knowledge. It must not be contradicted. That's the first point. And I will return to that. I'm just laying out the basic principle because it's important that you understand how the text has been understood within the tradition. So that's the first criteria for valid knowledge. First criteria for a pramana. It must not be contradicted. We have words in Sanskrit for all of these things. It's called the principle of abadhitatvam. Knowledge that is not contradicted. Abadhitatvam. The second principle for the pramana, for the validity of the pramana, is that it must tell us something. It must teach us something. It must impart a knowledge that is unique, that can only be known through it. So the general principle here is that every valid source of knowledge gives us a unique knowledge. So for example, if you take the five senses, we regard the five senses as valid sources of knowledge. But each sense organ provides a unique experience. So the eyes, I can see colors if they're functioning well, and I can see forms. But with my eyes, I can't hear sounds, or I can't feel sensation, or I can't taste. So five senses, each one providing a unique knowledge. If with my ears I could see, hear, touch, smell, then we'll need one sense organ. We wouldn't need five. But five sense organs, because each one gives a unique knowledge, a unique experience of the world. So we regard, in the Hindu tradition, we regard perception, sense perception, which we call pratyaksha, as a valid source of knowledge. Like the Veda, we say pratyaksha is also a valid source of knowledge. Similarly, we say inference is a valid source of knowledge. It's called in Sanskrit anumana, is also a valid source of knowledge. Like You know the most famous example of inference is where there is smoke, there is fire. Because in every instance that you see smoke, you see fire. When you went, you saw fire. So now if you see smoke alone, you conclude there is fire. Right? So that's called anumana or inference, and that's valid because it depends on the perception. All perceptual data confirms that where there is smoke, there is fire. So now if you see smoke alone, you can say there is fire, and that's valid knowledge. That's Pramana. That's valid knowledge. So every valid source of knowledge, including the Veda, provides a unique understanding. It's not contradicted. So these two things go together. It's not contradicted by what we know of the world from another valid source, but it provides a unique knowledge. If it did not, then it would be redundant. Why do I need the Veda to tell me something that I can see with my eyes, I can know through perception or inference? Then I put it hypothetically, perhaps there is something that can't be known otherwise because of its nature. We will get to that point, because here, one pramana does not contradict and does not duplicate also another pramana. Each pramana is a unique way of knowing. So you find that in the Hindu tradition, a lot of attention is given to this question: what are the valid pramanas? And what kind of knowledge each pramana gives? It's a very, in philosophy, we speak of this as epistemology, valid knowing. How do we know? And how do we know what we know is true? This is the field of epistemology. There's a third criteria that I will mention briefly. And this is especially true in the case of the study of the Upanishads. And this is that this knowledge is fruitful. As I said before, it makes a difference. It is conducive to human well-being. It promotes human flourishing. It's called phalavat artha bodhakatvam. It is knowledge that generates meaningful result, what I called earlier, knowledge that is transformative. So if you follow all that I have said so far, then the question is, what are the Veda, or what is the Veda, if we just use the word singular for the whole teaching, what is the Veda a pramana for? What is the unique knowledge that it gives us? So we say it must not be contradicted, but it must also give something unique that is not available through any other pramana. So the question is, what is the Veda a pramana for? And we divide the Veda broadly into two sections. Each of the four Vedas we divide broadly into two sections. Veda, what we say, Veda Purva Shastram and Veda Anta Shastram. Veda Purva, the first half, and Veda Anta, the last half, the last section. So Veda Purva Shastra, Veda Anta Shastram. Veda Purva Shastram, the first half of the Veda, is what we call the Karma Kanda. Kanda means section or division, is the Karma Kanda section. Karma here means action. But because everything in this first section of the Veda requires karma, requires some action. Something must be done. So it provides the first half of the Vedas, Rig Veda, Sam Veda, Yajur Veda, Atharva Veda. The first half provides instructions that must be implemented by doing something, by putting these instructions into action to gain desirable results. So if you want, I'm just using it as an example, if a couple would like to have a child, then Veda says, Putra Kameshti Yajna. So there is a ritual called Putra Kameshti for the blessings of a child. So that knowledge is given, now you perform the yajna. If you have Shraddha or faith, it produces a result. And so there are many such rituals described and discussed in the Karma Kand, the first section of the Veda. And all of these rituals are meant for, when they are properly performed, the action is done as instructed, then the belief is that they create appropriate results. These results are called punya. They produce desirable results either later in this life or in a life to come. But all of them, the knowledge alone is not enough. If the Veda says putra kameshti yajna, then it must be done. Some karma has to be performed to generate the result. Karma jnanam, in other words, karma jnanam does not produce results. Karma anushtanam does. Karma anushtana means putting the jnanam into action. That is what generates the result. Karma jnanam is not enough. Karma anushtanam is what is necessary. Actions have to be done to generate results. So sometimes, we speak of the first half of the Vedas, the Veda Purva Shastra, as the ritual section, Karma Kanda, or the ritual section of the Veda. The second half of the Veda, Veda Anta Shastram, is called Jnana Kanda, the wisdom section, Jnana Kanda. And this section is constituted by the Upanishads. The Upanishads constitute the wisdom or the Jnana Kanda of the Vedas. And here the subject matter is not karma or ritual, but the subject matter is the divine. It is Brahman, the limitless, the infinite. It is also known, as I'm sure you're familiar, it is also known as the Vedanta section, because Anta means end. So Vedanta means that which comes at the end of the Vedas. So this section is also called the Vedanta section, and the Vedanta section is constituted by the Upanishads, which is itself a very beautiful Sanskrit word, the Upanishad. So we are studying Kena Upanishad. The root of the word Upanishad is Shad. Shad. That's the basic root. Shad means to end, to wear out, or to end. Upa means near. Near. To go near is called upa, near, as a prefix, upa. And ni has various meanings. Ni means respectfully, reverentially, but ni also means well understood, well ascertained. So Upanishad, that word, suggests the receiving of a knowledge by going near or being with Upa, a teacher, a guru. A knowledge that Shad, the root, that destroys ignorance. A knowledge that destroys avidya, Upanishad. A well ascertained, if you take ni as meaning well ascertained, then you get receiving from a teacher a well thought knowledge that destroys avidya or or ignorance. And this is what the Upanishad is. It's a teaching, as we will see, that aims to overcome or to destroy avidya. What is important also, and this is one difference between Veda Purva Bhaga, the first section of the Veda, and the last section of the Veda, the Upanishads, Veda Anta Bhaga. The first one, as I said, the first section provides knowledge of rituals that must be performed in order to bear fruits. In this case, however, which is the Jnana Kanda, the wisdom section, the Upanishads, understanding is itself the end, the fruit. Knowledge is the fruit. This is what we speak in Sanskrit of the sambandha. The subject matter, the connection between the subject matter and the fruit is called sambandha. And this fruit is immediate. The fruit of knowledge is immediate. And I will speak more about that as we go along. But to conclude this morning, every study, this also is a study. Every study has certain requirements. Every study has certain prerequisites which are necessary. Now we admit students to college who have achieved a certain level of proficiency so that they can cope with the demands of undergraduate study. Here also in our tradition, the study of the Upanishads has its own kinds of prerequisites, its own kinds of requirements. And in our tradition, these are called sadhana chatushtaya, the fourfold means. It's very beautiful discussion of what these are. It will take a lot of time to go through each one. The first is viveka, which is the ability to think clearly, and to differentiate between truth and untruth, to differentiate between the finite and the infinite. The second is vairagya. Vairagya is, it was assumed that a student came to the study of the Upanishads because she or he had come to understand that he or she wanted something more in life. Something was missing. That the finite gains, nothing is wrong with the finite gains, but these finite gains, the gains of wealth and sense pleasure, they were lacking something. They were not sufficient for flourishing, for good living. So came with desire for something more. This is called vairagya. Sort of a certain detachment. We need the finite, but we must not be attached to the finite. So a certain detachment from the finite and a longing for the infinite is called vairagya. And then among the other qualifications mentioned was shama, which is control of the mind, dhamma, control of the senses, uparama, faithful performance of your work, whatever work you do, titiksha, which is balance in life, sradha, I'll speak on it in 1 minute, sradha of faith, and samadhana, focus. All of these qualities, when you examine them carefully, are intended to ensure that the students of the Upanishads were attentive, they were focused, they were diligent in study, and then the study was fruitful. But this morning, before I conclude, I just want to just lift up one of these qualities that I think is really important for the time that we will spend together. So among the qualities listed, sadhana chatushtaya is Sradha. Shraddha is translated as faith. And there are many references, to this word in our Shastras. Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna says, you recognize this very famous sentence, Shraddhavan labhate jnanam. Shraddhavan labhate jnanam. The one with Shraddha will know, will understand, will gain knowledge. Shraddhavan, the student who has Shraddha, she or he will gain knowledge, will understand. So why is Shraddha so important? It is defined as Guru Vedanta Vakyeshu Vishwasa. Guru Vedanta Vakyeshu Vishwasa. Vishwasa is also faith. Faith in the teachings of the Shruti and as expounded by the Guru. But Shraddha is not blind belief in the Hindu tradition. My own teacher used to tell a very beautiful story about what Shraddha is, which I would like to tell you briefly this morning. And he told the story in various versions about a person who was born blind. And he was never able to see. But then a surgical procedure was developed by surgeons to correct his sight problem, to allow him to see. And this surgery was done on many who suffered with the same deficiency, and then it was his turn for this surgery. So he went for the surgery. He had the surgery done. And of course, when you have eye surgery, as you know, the eyes are blindfolded for some time, for a few days. So his eyes were blindfolded. And then the surgeon came into his room one morning and removed the bandage from his eyes and told him, open your eyes. And this patient kept his eyes closed very tightly. And so the surgeon said, why are you not opening your eyes? Please open your eyes. And he said, doctor, I will open my eyes, but first you must prove to me that I will see. If you convince me that I will see when I open my eyes, then alone I will open my eyes. So how could, what argument can you give him? Doctor can say, I performed the surgery and you will see, but there's only one proof, right? There's only one proof. He has to open his eyes. The surgeon can't prove to him that he will see unless he opens his eyes. Opening those eyes, my guru used to say, is Sradha. Opening the eyes is Shraddha. So here we will be studying this Upanishad. And you have to give it a chance. Giving the teaching a chance is what is called Shraddha. Keeping an open mind is what is called Shraddha. Later on, next time we meet, we will study the first mantra of this text, where the teacher has the students praying. may I not deny Brahman. Now, if I start with denial, then there is no possibility of knowledge. So Shraddha is keeping an open mind, for inquiry, like the patient, willing to open his eyes to see. And that's why I always say, that of all of the requisites of knowledge, of Upanishadic knowledge, I think Shraddha is the most important requirement. The willingness to consider. The willingness to consider the teaching. The willingness to allow the teaching to work is Shraddha. And I hope that you will bring this willingness to our classes. So the Kena Upanishad is one of the shorter Upanishads, but one of the very important Upanishads. It's an Upanishad in which the teacher and the student are not named. It belongs to the Sam Veda. Each Upanishad belongs to one of the 4 Vedas. This one belongs to the Sam Veda. It has 35 mantras that are divided into 4 chapters. So each chapter in an Upanishad is called Adhyaya. So Kena has 4 Adhyayas and 35 mantras. And so in these classes, we will be studying every mantra, discussing every mantra thoroughly, and trying to unpack the vision of this teaching. And so with these words, I will close our first class today.